Welcome to Conversations Different, the podcast of the Santa Fe New Mexican, featuring the interesting people, places, and issues of northern New Mexico. This is Inez Russell Gomez, and today we have the honor of speaking to Arthur Sze. Arthur is Santa Fe's first poet laureate, a professor emeritus at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and someone with 2 books scheduled to come out this April. Welcome, Arthur.
Thank you.
First, let's talk about your next 2 books. I mean, that's a lot at once.
It is. The first book, Into the Hush, is my 12th book of poetry, and by coincidence or good fortune, it's being released today.
Oh, so my gosh. So as we tape
right now.
Okay.
And the second book, The White Orchard, is a selection of interviews and essays, and in a way they support or help a reader navigate my work and understand my background. And that's published by the Museum of New Mexico Press here in town, and that's coming out within the week.
So it would make sense to get one of them, like to get The White Orchard, to understand your perspective and how you approach your poetry, and then read the poetry, perhaps.
Some people will have different points of view. Some people will say, read the poetry, just do what you can, and then read secondary material and learn about the author. And in many cases, it works fine to read about the author first and get situated a little bit. And that's where The White Orchard certainly comes in, because it talks about my 22 years of teaching at the Institute of American Indian Arts. So there's a strong Native culture there. There's an essay in The White Orchard about my connection to acequias in northern New Mexico.
Which is ditch cleaning. La Limpia is going on right now.
Yes. Saturday, this coming Saturday, Acequia del Llano on Upper Canyon Road will be having their cleaning. So that's one way to approach it, is to get situated and get some background and then look at the poetry.
That's actually one of the things I was thinking about, is how we approach poetry. Is it something you can immerse yourself in and just feel it? And then it's also something you can go line by line and look at the words, try to figure out the author's motivations. There's so many ways to approach it.
Absolutely. And I think my suggestion is a reader or a listener of poetry that you try different approaches and see what works best for you. When I taught at the Institute of American Indian Arts, many of my students were intimidated by just the word poetry, like, oh, this is going to be difficult, it's going to be hard to understand. And actually, that was my experience in public school years ago, that poetry had to be difficult, and it doesn't. So I think a reader can just read the poem, not worry too much about feeling like you have to get the right take on it, because there are many different ways of experiencing the poem, but really to trust your own experience and find certain moments in a poem that really resonate with you, and then let those be like seeds and let them grow inside of you.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So you can tell that you have a way with words just listening to you talk. Now, I wonder what drew you to poetry.
I came to poetry by accident, really. As I mentioned in the opening essay in The White Orchard, I was actually a freshman at MIT, which is all science and technology.
I was going to say, you were a scientist.
My father got his PhD in chemical engineering. He was an immigrant from China. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps. And when I got to MIT, my very first semester, I was in a calculus lecture, and I just thought, do I really want to do this with my life? I can do it, and I just flipped to the back of my notebook and I started writing. So it was really by accident, and then I just was so excited about writing. I knew very quickly that's what I wanted to do. And I always think of Thoreau, who says most men lead lives of quiet desperation.
Yeah.
And I feel like I could have gone on and been a dutiful son and, pursued a career in math or science, but I always would have ached to know what could I have done if I had followed my dream and my passion. And so for me, when that started, one thing led to another, and it changed my life, and I ended up here in Santa Fe.
That is an amazing journey. So you didn't stay at MIT at that point. You transferred schools, if I remember right.
I did. I was at MIT 2 years. By the end of my first year, I was taking all literature classes. But, it takes a year to apply to a college. And so that second year, I was taking literature classes. I had a wonderful poetry workshop with the poet Denise Levertov, who taught at UC Berkeley. And that's how I decided to go to the West West Coast.
Okay, and where did you end up?
So I transferred to University of California at Berkeley.
Okay, so you went to Berkeley. That must have been an exciting time. I'm not sure, about what years were you there?
1970 to 72. It was the tail end of lots of social unrest and riots and the Vietnam War protests.
Yeah, I really was probably tired.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I say about my generation. We're not really baby boomers, but our parents were exhausted from our older brothers and sisters, and they just let us do whatever we wanted.
Right.
Yeah. What was it like studying words and writing from an academic perspective?
Well, when I was in school, I, like many people, thought poetry is difficult. It's intimidating. But when I started to write poetry, I approached reading poems totally differently. It was like, how did the writer create this experience with language? How did he or she shape the language? And so for me, it became a continual process of discovery, and it was just endlessly exciting. So I never really approached poetry like a critic. I approached poetry like a creator, a writer, and I read poems like food, really. To me, they were like sources of energy. I wasn't reading them to write an essay or a critical paper about. It was more like, this is work that someone has written that can sustain me or help me find my way.
That's a really, I think, beautiful way to approach just any of the written word, because we're in such a post-literate society, and we forget that if you go back to writers that move you, it can really help your whole state of mind.
Absolutely. And it's interesting what you say about post-literate, because one of the key things about poetry is sound and rhythm. And certainly for young people, spoken word is a huge movement and really popular. And to hear poems out loud is so important. And to hear it through someone's body and their voice and their rhythm and the kind of emphasis they put on the language, that's all oral.
Right.
So poetry communicates first in that way.
It was something that we told stories around the campfire, or we expressed ourselves. Maybe it wasn't like a rhyming poem, but it was, a series of words. And that's how we told everyone how we felt.
Absolutely.
I like that. We'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
Are you dreaming of a home of your own in Santa Fe but feel like it may never happen? HomeWise is here to help. We are a local nonprofit that has helped close to 7,000 New Mexicans from all income levels and backgrounds become homeowners. HomeWise has everything you need to succeed in home ownership, including free coaching and classes, real estate services, affordable fixed-rate mortgages with low down payments, and down payment assistance to qualified borrowers who meet income restrictions and credit qualifications. We'll be with you every step of the way. Get started today on your path to owning a home. Call 505-983-9473 or visit us at homewise.org. Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 188231.
We are back with Conversations Different, talking to Arthur Sze, who is a poet. And I love saying that because, how many people in the world are poets?
Maybe a lot of people write poetry secretly or occasionally, but for people who write poetry as their primary endeavor in life, I would say very few.
Yeah, it's just a really singular kind of profession and avocation and love, I think. You were the town's first poet laureate. So what did that mean?
I got to invent the program in many ways because I'm trying to think, I think it was in 2006 to 2008.
Okay.
I was the first city poet laureate, and a lot of it had to be invented. And I remember discussing with the City of Santa Fe Arts Commission different kinds of programming, and there was very little support. It was like, you're the poet laureate, go ahead. What are you going to do?
Do what you're going to do.
Exactly. So I thought the important thing was to bring people together, to have readings, have live readings of poetry by the poets themselves in different venues. I didn't want the poetry readings to be in the university, on the old College of Santa Fe campus, or
even at a fancy bookstore or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the things I did was I went to the Palace of the Governors, and I stopped in and saw Tom Leach, who was doing the letterpress work there. And he said, said, Arthur, I could do a broadside of your poetry and other poets who read, and we could have a reading inside the courtyard of the Palace of the Governors. And I thought, that what a historic place, what a fantastic idea. Let's have a reading there. And I curated a reading called Sacred Sites, where poets read poems related to places that were particularly important to them. And then I remember thinking, I want to do some outreach to kids in schools, high school. How do I do that? And I approached Arlene Zeiselman at the Museum of Fine Arts, and I asked if I could get permission to have high school students come in and I could walk through the museum with them, and they could pick out paintings that interested them and write poems inspired by those paintings in the Museum of New Mexico collection. And she thought that was a great idea. So then that took off. I did an outdoor workshop at Aspen Vista when the aspens were turning in October, and I just called it a nature haiku nature writing workshop, and people met outside. We met in the parking lot, and I read some poems, and I gave people prompts, and they went out into the woods and wrote poems and came back. So I got to invent lots of different things.
That sounds like it must have been marvelous, especially I think high school kids in town don't always get to go to their own museums because they're so busy with their other lives. And to go and then to see how one piece of art can spark another art form, what a great connection to make for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe all of the arts are interconnected. And here in Santa Fe, we have such a strong arts community. Certainly the visual arts are maybe the best known, but really all the arts are very strong. And it's important that everyone recognize it's not a competition. The arts inspire and support each other.
That's right. We feed on it. And literary arts, especially, I think, are really having a moment. It's no small part because of IAIA. I mean, the literary program there has done incredible things in the last 2 decades.
I had the good fortune of being at the Institute from 1984 to 2006. And I was there in very, very difficult times during the Bureau of Indian Affairs when the Institute almost closed.
I was going to say, when you lost your funding.
Right, exactly.
I remember those days.
But I was also the one who got to rebuild the program, and I had a vision of what that program could be. And so many of the Native students are doing so amazingly well today.
Yeah, it's been kind of exciting. It's like when Tommy Orange writes a book about, the relocation center in Oakland and San Francisco area, and your in-laws met at that center. It's like you can take it to your kid and say, look, there's a book that kind of is about your grandparents, even if it's not their specific story. It really is incredible to see the different things that are now being written about that wouldn't have been approached without that program and without the work you did to get it going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were so many obstacles to overcome. And it wasn't just funding. Many of the Native students, I remember one student, Sherwin Bitsui, who transferred from Prescott College in Arizona, came into my office and he said, the professors at Arizona don't understand what I'm writing. They think I should be writing about Navajos on horseback and bleeding sunsets. No. And yes. And I was like, oh my God. And I took one look at his poetry and I said, you're really writing about a world out of balance. And if people don't understand how your images work or connect, don't worry about it. But I tried to give him the courage to pursue his own vision. And and so many of the students went on and did that in their way.
Yeah, that's important because, I mean, one of the things about poetry is that it's so open to interpretation. It can be this for one person, this for another person, but for the person writing, it has to be true to that vision, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also a very mysterious process. When I'm writing a poem, I might think the poem is about a particular thing, and then someone else will look at it and see something totally different, like you say, and I'll think, oh, I didn't foresee that, I didn't envision it, but now I can understand that's a possible way of looking at it. And I often think that's a good sign, that as a creator, you can't control the language, you can't control the experience. If it's really alive in a poem, it is going to be open to different interpretations, different kinds of experience. The important thing is that a reader just approach the language and experience and be authentic and true about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's important that to me, the beautiful thing about writing is that you feel, I'm just a reader, I'm not a writer, except of weird editorials, which is a different kind of writing entirely. But I feel like I know the people whose work I love and I feel connected to them. And it's always kind of a shock when you find out that you're really not their best friend. But there's such an incredible emotional tie to someone whose work you love.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. I mean, I think for me one of the things that draws me in about poetry is poems tend to be short, they're concise, they're compressed. It's a kind of essential language, essential experience, and it's a deep experience. So if a reader connects with that, you really feel that intimate connection.
Oh, good. That makes me feel a little better because I know sometimes when you read poetry, it's like painful, and it's not just sometimes you get joy, but a lot of times the emotions are very strong. And I think sometimes the world is harsh right now. So I don't know if that's easier for you to write now or if it's harder when it's harsh.
I think it doesn't matter. I can just write under different circumstances. And I think, obviously, if a poem you can't just write a poem that is all gorgeous images.
Right.
I mean, the light needs the darkness needs the light. They transform each other. So I'm a firm believer that a poem can never be too dark. You can go into the darkest regions of experience. And if you're writing it as a poem, you're transforming it and harnessing it as art. And that you can face your deepest fears, your greatest anxieties. That's fine. That's something art needs to do. And you can also celebrate your greatest joys. One doesn't exclude or preclude the other.
I think as a consumer, it seems harder for people to write their greatest joys in a way that's not schmaltzy. But the misery can come out and it's there and it's strong. So I don't know why that's so hard.
No, that's a really important point because I think beginning writers often come in and they're trying to sort of tell the reader too much about the experience. They're not trusting the language enough to create the experience. I'm making a jump here to Japanese drama, but Zeami, one of the founders of masked no drama in Japanese theater, once told his students, he said, you younger playwrights, you have this terrible tendency of having to say in brackets like this is happy or this is joyful or this is sad. And he said, remember, the language must be the thing itself. If you're experiencing intense joy, you don't have to say I'm joyful. Right. You make the language convey that into the experience of the reader and listener. So you never have to use those verbal cues, and yet all the emotions are there.
Yeah, we have that in journalism, show, don't tell. Mm-hmm. And like if you're saying someone has a scar, you have to say, well, it's a 3-inch pussy, blah, 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 right. blah. And that gives it, because you want the visual to be there for the person reading your story.
Right. That visual definition is really important.
What led you, as you studied literature and, moved from science to the arts, what led you to choose poetry?
Well, I started with poetry right away. I think when I wrote that first poem years ago at MIT, I was writing short, intense phrases full of images. And for me, one of the key vehicles of poetry is imagery. It's communicating through, like you say, that 3-inch scar or a particular mushroom or bird or moment of experience.
On that note, we'll take a quick break and be back with more Conversations Different.
This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. Looking to reach a wider audience and grow your business? For 175 years, the Santa Fe New Mexican has been the trusted voice of Santa Fe, with unmatched local reach in print and online. In addition to our long-standing, independent, family-owned newspaper, we have a full-fledged marketing team with the expertise to help you succeed in the 21st century. From traditional print to precision-targeted digital advertising, we have the tools to connect you with your ideal customers. Partner with us and see the results for yourself. Advertise with the Santa Fe New Mexican and unlock your business's full potential. Visit us at santaFeNewMexican.com/advertising or call us at 505-995-3852. Thank you.
We are back with Conversations Different. We're talking to Arthur Sze about his 2 books, one of poetry, one essays, recollections, and it'll have some poetry as well?
Yes.
Good. So people who love his work, and I know there's a ton in Santa Fe, we're going to be flooded this month, and it's lucky. Are you tired? I mean, that's a lot of creativity to come out at once.
I'm not tired because the book of poetry, Into the Hush, is 5 years of writing.
Oh.
I like to work early in the morning before sunrise every day. I work steadily. Some writers especially when they teach, don't write for months and then they have a torrent in the summer. I work steadily, and so over 5 years of writing, the book has been accumulating. There are a lot of poems I think weren't good enough that didn't make it into the book, but I felt like I took my time. I let the poems grow organically and get into conversation with each other, and then the book came together. And the second book, although it seems like, oh my God, 2 books at once, the second book includes interviews from like 20 years ago up to last year, and it wasn't an intentional book, but when Ana Gallegos at the Museum of New Mexico Press gave me the opportunity to put that book together, I thought, what would be a selection of interviews I've done over time that could help a reader understand how I work with language and my own journey and path as a poet, and then include supporting poems where if in an interview a particular poem is discussed, the person didn't have to go out and buy that book. It was like there in the back of the book.
Oh, that's nice of you. I'm thinking back to how you started, on the back of your notebook at MIT writing your first poem. What did your papa say when you went home and said, I'm not going to be a scientist?
He was furious. He was an immigrant. So in the household I grew up, the choice was like, are you going to be a scientist or an engineer?
Oh.
Or, okay, maybe a doctor or an investment banker. But artist, poet, that was like too scary, too risky, too off the possible.
Right, right. No, I get, it's like in my town when I was little, are you going to Highlands? And then when we moved to Texas, it was like, are you going to Texas Tech? There was not a many, ton of choices. And it's okay because you still got to college and you got finished. But sometimes our parents didn't think of all the possibilities, did they?
That's true. And I think because they were immigrants, there was a particular obsession with security. Financial security. And I understand that. And at one point, my early day, I've been in Santa Fe over 50 years. And in the beginning, I was living in different sort of hovel apartments on West San Francisco Street that have all been torn down.
As I say, with drug deals out the corner.
And my father came and he saw me with like a typewriter, a few books, and like a mattress on the floor. And he was like, you left MIT for this?
Oh.
You couldn't believe it.
I feel that. When I came to the New Mexican as a reporter, the first time, I couldn't find a place to live. There was, I guess, a lot of demand, but I ended up on the east side off Canyon Road because I was from Las Vegas, and dirt streets and mud houses meant that you were on West Las Vegas, which was actually the poorer side of town in those days. So I thought, I'm in a safe, clean, poor neighborhood. This will be great. And then I found out that was the fancy part of town. But my dad comes and looks at the house and said, did they try to make everything crooked? Do you want to live like this? And it was the same exact.
Interesting.
Yeah,
That's
he was
great.
just like, why are you there? And,
Right.
and of course, reporters made no money.
Right.
So
right.
it was like,
Similar situation.
Yeah. I liked it and I kept doing it. So, lucky that I'm still here doing, and you're still a poet. I mean, how many, all those years?
I think it's such a blessing to be able to do something you're passionate about and to have the opportunity in your life to pursue it. Yes, you need a certain amount of money to pay bills or whatever, but that's certainly not my primary goal. If I have time to create, I feel rich as a person and as an artist.
I always tell my kid, you need enough. That's all.
Right.
Not enough, it's hard because, all of us of a certain age.
Struggling.
Yeah, we were broke when we were little, and it's not fun. But having so much that you work all the time to get it is not fun either.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you think in our country today that poetry maybe could help heal us a little bit? Can everybody, you could be a MAGA person and enjoy poetry. It doesn't have to just be, a great liberal or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly believe that poetry reaches out to all people. I think that's really an important lesson.
Yeah, because we all have emotions and we all hurt and we all feel joy, and we need to have a way of expressing that.
And poetry brings people together. People say, oh, you can't make a living as a poet or whatever, and that may be true. But also the other thing is poetry isn't part of our sort of consumer culture. They're written out of love. They're written to be shared. It's not about making money or that kind of thing, but it's a way of bringing people together. And you find that poems can reach people with different political persuasions, economic persuasions, different backgrounds. I'm a firm believer that poetry is about dissolving boundaries between people.
Did you ever think that you wished you'd lived like at a time when Lord Byron was the most famous person in England and poets were the talk of the town?
Not really. I mean, I will say that I also translated ancient classical Chinese poetry, and I learned my craft doing that. And sometimes I will say to myself, translating an ancient poem, be like, gee, I wish I could step into China in 750 Common Era and just have a glimpse of what it was like. And there was a whole poetry renaissance going on there. But really, I love the time that I'm living in, and we don't get to choose that. We get to make the best use of it that we can.
That's right. You're here to do as well as possible
Right.
and seize your life and enjoy
Right.
it. Yeah. How is knowing another language, do you think that affects your use of words and your understanding of the language you're using?
Absolutely. I mean, I think English is a very malleable language, and I'm not a linguist, but historically it's been given sort of words from French, words from German.
Words from Tiwa?
Yeah, words from Tiwa. For me, learning Chinese and translating classical Chinese poetry was really important because the way the poems were put together often involved what I call juxtaposition, of taking one thing and placing it next to another and not making the connection clear. It had a kind of mystery. Ooh. Like if you take tree and you write a second tree and put them together, you create the word forest. Or if you write the word autumn and you put heart underneath, you create sorrow. Autumn in the heart is the word sorrow. Oh. And it's never said explicitly, but they're juxtaposed, they're brought together. And that's one of the things I love to do with English, is take images and not explain to a reader, but let the reader have to see or feel some kind of connection for themselves, what is going on below the surface. So I think knowing another language is huge. And when I taught at the Institute of American Indian Arts, I tried to encourage Native students to use their own language, or even if they were writing a poem entirely in English, to think about how could they imbue the English with a kind of Native culture and personal Native perspective.
Right, because the syntax of a language is so different.
Right.
So how you put the words together will depend on what you knew first and
right.
everything. Yeah.
So having another language, I think, helps one experiment and push English in certain directions wouldn't otherwise think about pursuing.
And when you think about that, expanding the possibilities versus the mentality of English only and nothing else, it really shows you how we could be more open and use our own language in a much richer way.
Absolutely. And then it leads from one language to another to another. When I first came to Santa Fe, I didn't know any Spanish, but I started reading Pablo Neruda. And I loved his poems in the Residencia. And I took classes at the College of Santa Fe when that existed, in the evening community class sessions, just to learn enough Spanish so I could read Neruda in Spanish and hear the sound and rhythm. That was so important. And then, of course, the imagery was staggering. And that was a really influential early period for me.
Wow. And that took a lot of work.
It did.
I've tried to learn Spanish about 1,000,000 times, including as a child hearing it spoken, and it's never sung. I had a roommate once. I used to rent rooms to interns because that's how I managed to cover my mortgage, because it was more than my rent and I didn't want to go broke. And he was the parent of Taiwanese immigrants, or the child of Taiwanese immigrants. And he spoke Chinese and Spanish and English, and he always felt very sorry for me because I could barely speak English. And it just made him so much more, I think, creative. You know, there's something about knowing languages that expands your brain.
Yeah, it feeds creativity. It's like having more resources.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I was hoping you could read something for us, and that'll, I think, make our listeners very happy.
I think I'd like to read the opening poem to the book.
Okay.
It's called Anvil. When a black butterfly flits past, when you glimpse the outlines of apple trees, when you smell the sprig of sunrise and walk up to the ditch, when bearing Aleut, Juma, Tuscarora join the list of vanished languages, when you turn a spigot and irrigate blossoming pear trees, when the time of your life is a time of earthquakes, when a woman hit by a car while crossing the street recovers then slides into pain, when a matsutake emerges out of the rubble of Hiroshima, when a bartender blows smoke rings and slips through hoops into his past, when foragers slice ruchulas, amanitas, clitosebes, and pursue red-capped boletes, when water slips through roots, rises through a trunk, streams into leaves, when in our bodies we sway and flood, when you bloody your hands, when the mind like this earth is struck and tilts its axis, when under summer stars you have built a cabin in the wilderness, when you gaze at Aldebaran and sense a first frost on the grass, when in our bodies we ride the waves of our earth, here is the anvil on which to hammer your days.
Thank you. This has been another Conversations Different. We'll be back next week. Thank you for listening to Conversations Different, hosted by me, Inez Russell Gomez, editorial page editor for the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our weekly episodes would not be possible without your support. We hope you enjoy them and keep listening. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Consider signing up for our newsletter so you never miss an episode, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our podcast is available by visiting our website, santafenewmexican.com/podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Conversations Different with Inez Russell Gomez is produced by Matt Dalside and Ernesto Cisneros, published by the Santa Fe New Mexican, a local and independent newspaper owned by Robin Martin.